really used to failing that much at that point. I was a high achiever and kind of really hadn't experienced that kind of failure. But yeah, you have to, obviously, to make money as a ballerina, you have to be incredible, and I just wasn't quite good enough. I was working for all of these brands. So Gucci Group at the time, you mentioned some of them. There was like 9 brands in the group, and I was responsible for looking after the UK across all those brands. As much as possible, as a people team, you have to get all of that stuff really, really excellent, because then getting buy-in for any number of initiatives or projects which you know are going to help the people, which ultimately is going to help the business.
Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Leadership, and today's a bit of a first for me, to be honest. But I have an amazing guest in the building. This is someone who has spent 2 decades plus working in HR for some amazing brands. Alexander McQueen, you might have heard of, Stella McCartney, St. Laurent, loads more in that caring luxury, like former Gucci Group kind of brand. She's been Chief People Officer at Dr. Barbara Sturm. And she's someone who, when you talk about, I'm going to say resetting or changing the way that HR is done and really, really focusing about the people, sustainable change, she speaks to that. She does a lot of work in that field. That's what her purpose is. And she does that as the founder of the Nature Consulting Limited. And she's someone I've got to know over the last couple of years. And I have Abigail Wilmore in the building. How are you doing?
What an intro. I'm good. I'm doing well. Thank you. Happy to be here having a conversation with you.
Hey, the intro is just you. The intro is just like a small summary of what you've done over the last however long. It's been a while. You've been in the game. So I'm just telling the truth. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's weird to have it, projected back to you, some of the things that you've done in your life and career. But yeah, it's good. Good to hear.
And if we were to go back to the place I always like to start, a younger you, let's never say before teenage. Let's go to like an 8-year-old Abigail. What was she like, and what did she want to do in life at that point in time?
She was quite rebellious, actually, even from an early age. I had the most amazing childhood, really wonderful household full of love, I will say. That's the way I look back on it when I'm talking with my sister or my mum and dad. It was a really amazing childhood in some ways, because it was quite unconventional, because my mum went out to work, and my dad stayed at home to bring my sister and me up and did all the kind of traditionally female roles, including doing our hair for ballet and all the kind of cooking and cleaning and washing up and everything. So that gave me a lot, actually. My mum, it was the 70s and 80s that I grew up in. So in those times, that was really quite unusual. But having that kind of mother that her career was basically paying more than my dad's. My mum's was an artist and makeup artist in the film industry. My dad was a mathematician and teacher at the time. So she just earned a lot more than him. And so, but having that kind of role model in a mother that had a lot of drive and passion for her career. And then a father who was very, very humble and very kind of welcomed this role where he could be close to his daughters. That's the kind of environment I grew up in. But they always pushed my sister and I to be ourselves and speak up for the things that we believed in. That's kind of, we always had, I remember, a lot of conversations about all kinds of topics. That was our kind of household, the dinners or lunches or meals that we would have together. We'd always be discussing things. So yeah, quite a rebel and quite strong-minded um, about lots of different things, particularly animals at the time. And becoming vegetarian was quite a defining moment in my life, and has, helped me to connect with other human beings, I think, as well, and just nature generally. But yeah, quite headstrong.
It's quite interesting listening to you having your mom as the role model, flipping that whole traditional way of working on its head, and how even seeing that made you, I guess for me, I'm getting that vibe of part of that headstrongness and that go after what you want kind of came from being in that environment of, well, we can do things differently. We don't always have to do things the way other people have done them, which I guess came from your parents.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even recognize it at the time, because when you're that young, it's just your normal. Although we knew, especially going to ballet, which we did a lot because I really wanted to grow up and be a ballerina. So I was practicing and going to classes with my sister as well, like 3, 4 times a week. But then we kind of recognized that this is different, because all the ballet mums would fuss over my dad and, tell him how amazing it was that he was the one. So that's where we kind of recognized it. But otherwise, yeah, it just felt like the norm for us. But yeah, it was quite untraditional.
So when did that love for ballet shift into fashion?
Long time. Although I say that my grandmother on my mum's side was very into fashion. So I always had a love of beautiful clothes, vintage kind of styles and things from my grandmother, who also helped to bring my sister and I up, because my mum was away a lot. But yeah, I knew I wasn't going to be a ballerina when I was probably around 16. But up until that point, that is really all I lived and breathed. I was good at school, but, and I had lots of other passions around creativity and writing. But ballet was, and dance generally, especially contemporary dance, was my love. But yeah, I realized I wasn't going to be a ballerina when I failed my first exam, which I remember distinctly my dance teacher coming round to our house and informing us all. My mum and dad, I think, were both there at the time, and my sister and me, um, that I had failed my first exam, which was a huge blow, because I wasn't really used to failing that much at that point. I was a high achiever and kind of really hadn't experienced that kind of failure. But yeah, you have to, obviously, to make money as a ballerina, you have to be incredible, and I just wasn't quite good enough. So I I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. I really had no other driving force behind, what I wanted to do, and that kind of continued really, for the next couple of years. I just did I'd just finished my GCSEs probably and was going into A levels, found partying and kind of rave music, and took maybe a more social path for a few years, and not being a kind of A grade student anymore. So I just didn't have much of a direction, I would say, but I just fell into things, with my mother having this creative side, my father having this more scientific, philosophical, mathematical brain. I had more creative pursuits, like I said, but I decided to go into retail. So I started on the shop floor. I didn't go to university, I think much to my parents' dismay. But I just wanted to earn money, and I wanted to start something. So I started my career on the shop floor, working for Estee Lauder, as a makeup artist and selling the cosmetics. It was a great experience, if I'm honest. I really enjoyed a lot about being on the shop floor, being in an environment of luxury. It's probably where that part of my career maybe started. Being in a perfumery, there's just something about the smell of walking into a department store in the perfumery that can be overpowering and a bit overwhelming, but also, I don't know, it's like a different world. So I did really enjoy that. But my main thing in the beginning of my career was to earn money so I could go out partying and, go out at the weekend and just enjoy my life and have fun. So I didn't really have much of a thought process behind having a career at that point.
I think a lot of times there's a lot of pressure that's put on young people in particular that says you need to have everything all figured out by a particular age. If not, your life's basically gonna not work out for you. But actually, we're gonna come into what you've done later on. But listen to you be like, actually, you know what? I've got a job. I want to earn money. I want to enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with that. And that for me, I think is quite freeing as well, because sometimes you need to be able to be like, I don't have the plan, but right now what I'm doing, I'm enjoying it, and that's okay. And once I've come out of that phase, I'll go into the next one. But it's okay just to keep it moving forward. It's okay not to have it all completely scripted or going down the path that you think your parents want you to.
Yeah, I think so. I possibly didn't see that at the time as that, but definitely in hindsight, you can see it. Also because my sister and me laugh about this now, but she always saw me as this sort of glamorous working person, and I always saw her as following that path. She went to uni. In fact, first she went on a year trip around the world, and then she went to uni, and so there was always that kind of sense of, one of their daughters is doing it. I always felt like the rebellious, daughter who hadn't followed their path, but I liked that. I liked to carve my own way, I suppose. And actually being on the shop floor as well teaches you so much about other people and about yourself. You're dealing with customers and different kinds of people all the time, and having to think on your feet, and probably taught me a lot of skills that, helped me along the way.
Did you find it hard when you were on the shop floor? Because I've been on the shop floor with customers, and some clients are just I'm trying to find the right words to be able to use, but they're not easy to deal with sometimes. And especially working in somewhere like Estee Lauder, there is a level of entitlement that sometimes certain clients might have in the way that they speak to you, in the way that they approach you. And you talked about some of the skills that you learned in that period of time. I'm curious, like, what were they that helped you that's over the years, if you go back?
I think it's probably around just, I mean, yeah, there were definitely some difficult customers for sure. And like learning how to shake that off and not be affected by it, especially as I was working in stores, which, yeah, there were certain types of people that would come into those stores like Harvey Nichols and Selfridges, that wouldn't necessarily treat you as an equal. So that was a bit tough, I'm sure. But I think you just learn to, yeah, brush it off. But I think you also learn the skill of accepting others in a way, and just, trying to, I mean, the customer comes first. That is what you're taught in whichever store you were working in, and whichever brand actually, that the customer comes first. But there's definitely humility and, you know, diplomacy, and ways of communicating, and kind of reaching people. Because actually, a lot of the time, customers were coming to Estee Lauder about, something that they wanted to improve about themselves, be it makeup or skincare or whatever. So that's quite an intimate place to be in a way. And so doing someone's makeup, you have to be close with them, and there's something that you will always learn about that person, in that short time that you're with them. So yeah, I've not been asked that question before, but I think it's probably about how to communicate really well with all different types of people.
It was interesting when I hear you say that, and then I think about your career in HR. It's like there's the love for people and seeing people, was that where a lot of that was birthed?
Yes, definitely. It was the people aspect of what I was doing that fascinated me, and the even within the team that I was working in, I knew it was that side rather than the. I mean, I did love the creativity that you can have with makeup as well, but it was more the teamwork, the camaraderie, the management eventually of other team members, and why people, what's the psychology behind why people want to come in and work in one way or another way. um, and then yeah, the relationship building with customers, it probably was the kind of beginning of how I knew what I wanted to do, although it still was quite a few years really before I really knew that human resources was my area.
You talking about your how you got into you went back to studying.
Yeah, so I went back to studying. There's a few jobs in between, trying things out in different kinds of organizations, which I needed to do as well. But I sort of fell into human resources is how I see it, which is, I think at the time human resources was called personnel and was just really about administration, transactional services for people in a company. Um, yeah, so I went back to study human resources because I could see that that is an interest, that was growing, and I thought it would be really helpful to my understanding, but also my confidence, to study. So I actually went to enroll, in an undergraduate program in a bachelor's degree because I didn't have a degree, and I had spent about 2 or 3 hours getting to the front of this queue. And then I got to the front and she said, "This is the postgraduate diploma, not the bachelor's degree." But she started talking to me about how much experience I already had. And by then I had a couple of years already in human resources. And she said, "Why don't you just try the postgraduate diploma and see? And you can always, change courses if it's too difficult." So I started the postgrad diploma. It took me 4 years at evening school. This is, um, but I managed to get my master's degree in human resource management, which was a massive thing for me, huge, and just the sort of like going through the studying was huge, but also achieving that was really huge. And yeah, still to this day, I'm one of the only people I know who has a master's degree without having a bachelor's degree. But it was again an untraditional,
Wow.
unconventional approach. Yeah, then my career really started to take off when I'd already, as I said, done a few years in human resources in different kinds of companies. I'd worked at a luxury property company, and then I got this call from Gucci Group, to come and be the HR manager. That was back in 2006.
Wait a minute, wait,
Big.
wait, 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 wait. How can you go from getting just a call, like they called you out of the blue randomly, like where did it come from?
I mean, I had my CV with some agencies probably, or some, when you put your CV out there on some job sites, then they never come back down again. So, and I think when agents are looking, they're obviously doing skill searches, and my CV had come up. So I know that sounds like luck and timing, but they must have been looking for someone who had some luxury experience, which I already had from Estee Lauder and Knight Frank. And they must have been looking for someone with human resources experience, obviously. So, it did feel like a call out the blue. However, I take it that it was about the experience that I already had, as to why they called me. But of course, when you get a call like that, you're going to go for it. So I remember talking to my friends at the time about it, and what am I going to wear, and this is Gucci Group, and how am I even going to, I don't know, put myself across in the right way. But the interview was with a really scary but wonderful woman. Two people actually, but one in particular. And yeah, they asked some really tough questions. And then they asked me about clothes and like what brands I liked. So after all the kind of skills based, can you do this job? They wanted to ask me about the type of brands that I liked, and my mind just went completely blank. And I thought, well, I don't have the money to buy, Dolce and Gabbana or Gucci or Saint Laurent brands right now. So what am I going to say? And what came out was, at the time, which is now sadly not even a store anymore, but what came out was Topshop and the vintage clothes of my grandmother. So I really love vintage clothing. Yeah, didn't think I'd got the job. Not because of that answer, but just when you can't tell how you've done in an interview. I thought it had gone well, but you just don't know. And then I went back again. I got called back for a second interview, and at that point I had researched as well the person that I was going back to see, and she was American. And I know in America, generalization here, but selling yourself is the thing to do. So I went into the second interview and just told her at the end that I really want this job. I really want this job. And she sort of gave me this knowing smile. And then I got the job. So that is, that's kind of the beginning of where my career started to become super exciting and so much more interesting, because I was working for all of these brands. So Gucci Group at the time, you mentioned some of them. There was like 9 brands in the group, and I was responsible for looking after the UK across all those brands. So then my kind of interest in why, certain people are drawn to working for certain cultures or certain people even, I was able to, expand upon that and really go more deeply into what makes a brand and what are the right set of ingredients for a company's environment or culture that attracts certain brands to certain places. So very quickly I got promoted, actually, because my boss also got a promotion to being president of another brand in a different country. So I became very young executive at Gucci Group, which is such a huge title that I even find it quite, you know, it sort of feels like I'm talking about someone else in a way. But yeah, I was thrown into this new world again. This was within about 2 years of having this job, where I was amongst the like top 300 people of Gucci Group at the time, which then became Kering, um, where you would be invited to these incredible conferences, and you'd have to talk about leadership and your style of leadership, and I had really no idea at that time, but it was an amazing experience of being thrown into these different kinds of scenarios and having to bring your best game, without really knowing necessarily that much at that point about leadership. Although I have to say that I think leadership came quite naturally to me, um, in terms of like building a team and playing to people's strengths and getting to know the real person within my own team. Um, but yeah, I do remember many, many years. I had one like person at work who was my person, and we both used to feel the same, like we literally could not believe that we were in this most incredible environment and this most amazing jobs, and we would just sometimes just hold hands in the lift and just say we are just so lucky, and we really recognize that this is just the most incredible journey that we're on. So there were many kind of moments along the way. Of course, I was there for a really long time, but probably my role deepened and expanded when I got the opportunity to become a lot more involved with Stella McCartney and Alexander McQueen because they were the two British brands. So they had headquarters in London, and I would be working directly with the CEOs of those brands. And as they grew, my role grew. As they became global, my role became global. And again, I just felt so lucky, really, to be a part of such incredible brands and see that growth. And they are two very different brands from a culture perspective and from a what they stand for. And then it was really a joy to be able to help to shape the culture and help those brands to and the people within those brands to really grow in the way that they wanted to, and to kind of connect all the dots. Because in human resources, which I actually hate that word, human resources, people function, it is about, for me anyway, it is about helping people to flourish and thrive when things are often challenging and difficult.
Mhm.
And especially in creative companies where you have to continually come up with new ideas, and that's what those two businesses were about. Always coming up with the next thing that's going to be fashionable, whatever that is. It's not an easy place to be for a lot of people, continually bearing your soul, to be kind of judged by the sales of the brands in all the stores. So yeah, it presented a lot of very interesting challenges when it comes to actually the individual people that would work there.
What's some of the lessons, I guess, that you learned in that period of time, especially working with multiple brands, multiple cultures, and therefore that means you're bringing in different people in. So what were some of those key lessons you learned about what it takes to build or create a great culture that people can actually thrive in?
I think for me, I think I knew very early on in my HR career that I was I really didn't believe in the kind of policing, policy driven structure of HR that had been around for so many decades. And on top of that, there has been a huge shift in the employee voice becoming so much louder. And I think it took a long time for me to recognize or understand like how to change that, how to rip up the rule book, how to create a really human centered company. But ultimately it is about listening to what people want, and just shifting the lens that marketing often uses on its customer, on the customer that's buying into the brands, the consumer, and using that lens on the people that work inside the company. And there wasn't the platforms at the time that we have today to really listen to people regularly. Like now there's some brilliant platforms to be able to do that, but it was for me about being very present and speaking to people all the times, and not just being that HR team that were behind the scenes and at the end of the phone or at the end of an email, but actually present in the brand and listening to people and pulling out the themes and then trying to get buy-in for whatever it is that you want to do. And I think I learned very quickly as well that you absolutely have to have your baseline excellent, like all of your admin, all of your processes. If you don't have that and someone gets a letter with the wrong salary or whatever, then you have no credibility at all. And that was a really good lesson, and I learned it a few times along the way, of doing, things and then messing up. But as much as possible, as a people team, you have to get all of that stuff really, really excellent, because then getting buy-in for whatever it is that you want to do, and kind of trying to portray the feeling in the company or the themes that are coming up in a way that isn't wishy-washy and isn't just fluffy. It's not easy to do. So if you have that great baseline, then you're much more credible in how you can go to your CEO or other people that you need to get buy-in from for any number of initiatives or projects which are going to help the people, which ultimately is going to help the business. And so, yeah, that's it's not an easy set of information. It's become easier because there's so much more data now. We have so many different ways to collect data, so it's easier to kind of tell that story through data than it's ever been before, which is great. It's been a huge game changer for the entirety of human resources. But there wasn't that at the time. So I think you asked me what I learned, and I learned to be trusting in what I can see in a company, and that it isn't fluffy, or for want of a better word, to talk about the health of the organization or the health of a certain team. This wasn't the language, that there is today as well. Because well-being at work has thankfully become, one of the most critical things that we can do as businesses generally, but certainly in the people team. But yeah, back then it was definitely learning to trust that I know that this is going to help, and then becoming a good storyteller ultimately, becoming confident to step into, any kind of environment. And as I said, lots of them are quite scary environments, in terms of, I don't know, in terms of like big C-suite people in the room, or it was owned by a group. So having to present your story and your reasons for why you want to do things I think I probably suffered from imposter syndrome quite a bit. So learning how to get over imposter syndrome as well was probably, which I'm still doing today, was the way that I managed to be in those rooms. And sometimes I would be in those rooms where there's like top people, and I would think beforehand, I'd thought, I'm really anxious and nervous, and what's it going to be like, and am I going to say the wrong thing? And then I'd get into the room and I'd think, is this it? Like, this is really what they're talking about? And I would always be sort of, I don't know, there was some mystical, thing that I would never be able to actually do. And then you get there and you're like, oh gosh, they're just talking about such normal things. And so that was quite a big learning for me too.
I think it's because when I listened to you talked about how excited you and your friend were around working with your group and all of that kind of stuff, and you were learning as you go along. It's quite interesting when I hear you say it around, you don't have to go and do these presentations and you're anxious, but it's like, oh, is that it once you've done it? So that is something around, we can overthink stuff so many times, and a lot of times it's just about just being able to step into it. And when we step into that, we realize, oh, it wasn't that bad at all. Because a lot of the learning that's come out across your journey, like you said, it wasn't like, oh, I've done this before, I've done that before. It's like, okay, this is in front of me, we need to figure it out. But you had a grounding in what was important to you. And I've heard you use the phrase in the past. We've talked about how you're tired of, or, like the phrase HR, for example. You're tired of the outdated HR rules and the way things are done. How does that frustration then I guess, tie in with what you're doing now with your company?
I think it's about now wanting to bring everything that I've learned in all of these incredible brands. And obviously then I went into Stella McCartney and stayed there for a really long time, 7 or 8 years, just fully devoted to Stella McCartney. But now it's about me wanting to bring, all these things that I've learned and what's gone wrong, what worked, what really helped people, what really helped a company to a much wider audience, to working with all kinds of different organizations. And I know that there's so much to do out there. And so having that, freedom for me to choose the kinds of businesses that I would like to work for as well, which isn't actually always purpose-led organizations or creative or luxury at all, which I thought maybe it might be when I was thinking about what business I wanted to build, because it's actually the other types of businesses that are not maybe as purpose-driven that potentially need more support and more help in redefining things for their people. And then I think, the pandemic has just propelled so many things forward, that were already happening, but at a much slower pace, around mental health, around equity, diversity, and inclusion, around wellness, and just the connection between, performance of people and belonging and staying with a company, and their mental health and their way of interacting with that company and the experience that they're having. All of those things have been propelled forward. And so that's why I also felt very strongly that I wanted to build my own business in helping to bring some of those more human centered ways of doing things to a wider set of businesses.
What was it like leaving that world? I want to say that world, that luxury world, in a sense, behind, and going out your own, because those are some main like big brands behind you, which is great from an experience perspective, is great from a name perspective. But I know one thing I've always talked about is around the identity that we can also have attached to being part of such a big name, big brand. So what was that like for you, that separation?
I mean, I definitely missed the discount and the fashion. It was hard. And it was hard because, as you said, so much of one's identity is tied up with the job that they do in the end, especially when you're at one place for such a long time. And so with some key mentors and supporters, I'm really a massive advocate for finding as many people that can help you through a transitional moment in your life, as possible. I learned how to be brave, I suppose, and just, that my identity isn't tied with any brand or company or industry, and just being much more clear and intentional about what it is that I am bringing to the table and what I want to bring to the world. But yes, it's taken a lot of self-reflection and thinking, and, as I said, support from different people, including yourself, to get there. And I'm still working on it. I'm still, carving out what it is that I want to say about my business and what it is that I'm, pitching in to different clients that I'm working with. And I think it changes and evolves, and that's the beauty of the place that I'm in right now. And for anyone who has their own business, it is a an ever evolving thing. I believe.
When you describe that, and then I go back to your earlier statement, and you use the words like heart-centered leadership. What does that mean to you? What is heart-centered leadership?
I think that in everything that I've seen in any company, people want to be seen and heard and valued. And I think that heart-centered leadership is about being a leader that is going to do those things, is going to really hear people, recognize people, and make them feel valued. And ultimately, that is a cycle that continues to generate, you know, more for a business, more for a team, more for an individual. So I think that's the that's the theory behind it, but also the mission for, I hope, many more leaders now who are leading with words like love and empathy and integrity, which never was the case before. You know, those things were seen as soft skills, and you know, there is no such thing. We know now. Soft skills are the skills to have as a leader today, and showing your heart um, to your team is like, it's critical. It's a critical part of being a leader and gaining trust, gaining respect, building relationships.
Do you see that happening in different generations, or is it just a change generally in the environment?
I think it's slower in older generations, I'm afraid to say. Well, just because we've lived through more of the working world that hasn't been like that. And so still many times today I hear, well, we didn't have to do it like that. And, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, new people who are starting out in their career, we might have been expected to do photocopying and make coffee for the first, you know, year of your employment, but that isn't the case anymore, and that certainly isn't what younger generations are going to stand for. In fact, now, you know, the expectation on companies is huge in terms of what young people are expecting. So I think, yeah, people coming into the work world now, and Gen Z, younger millennials, it makes sense that empathy and just being more human ultimately is the right thing to do, and is becoming the only thing to do. Otherwise, you're going to lose your people. But I think it's taking more time for us all to shift into seeing that. Again, I do think the pandemic provided, if there are silver linings that have come from it, which there definitely are, one of them was that you kind of thrown into this place as a leader where you just had no other options other than to be, you know, connecting with your people on a different level than you were before. So I think we've all learned, you know, that works. Even though we've got all, you know, a lot of other contexts happening with people moving around, and the Great Resignation. I can't even remember what the next term is now after the Great Resignation. There's something else that's replaced it, but I can't remember what it is. But anyway, all this other context. But I think it's going to become more and more and more necessary, which is good, which is such a good thing. So great. I feel so inspired by the fact that this is we're not going to be able to go back. Like, there's so many things in the world right now to feel devastated by, politically, economically, environmentally, socially. Like, there's so many things, but there are also some really positive movements and shifts that are happening on the more human side, and the world of work, I think, is definitely one of them. And I'm happy to be part of it and helping to be a driving force in it.
What in the work that you're doing through Nature Consultant? what would you want to see happen? What would you want to see change going forward?
I would want to see, there's so many things. I mean, because we really don't know how many of today's jobs are even going to exist in, 10 years time, with the way that technology is advancing and everything else that we know. So I would just like to see businesses engaging with people, which is already happening, but much more on individuals' terms. So, the way of an employment contract, and the expectation that you're going to be with an organization and stay with them, and all of that is important, but there is also a kind of push against that right now, where people want flexibility and they want to have their side hustles and they want several revenue streams. And so we're going to have to find a way forward where there is a way of coming together on that we can find ways as organizations and businesses to interact with people in a different way, but also that we can create experiences in companies which truly do help people to grow. I mean, there's so much, you hear that kind of cliche that people can be themselves at work, which is still, I think we're still quite far from that, because this new way of being is not been around that long yet for people to feel safe to be themselves at work completely, but it is going in that direction. So that is also hugely positive. So for people to be able to express themselves either creatively or whichever way that they want to within an organization, and that the organization is flexible enough and has enough of the right ingredients, and it obviously depends on so many factors as to what those ingredients are, that truly does make a difference to that individual's life, not just relying on the brand name or the product or other factors, which were definitely a big draw in the past and still are today. But brand is still so important, but people, I think, have now been recognized as the most important factor. Just not every business knows what to do about that or how to really make that a reality. So hopefully more businesses will.
And that's part of the work that you're going to be doing, helping them to understand the key that their people actually.
Exactly. Exactly. That is part of the work I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, there's still a lot of businesses that need policies and procedures, which I totally get, because we're in a new time now. And so, but yeah, it's shaping that set of right ingredients to that brand's set of values or that brand's purpose for being. That is what the work that I really enjoy doing, and that I'm hoping is really helping the clients that I'm working with.
What's the biggest lesson that you say you have learned?
That's a big one. Honestly, the biggest lesson is, again, it's going to sound like a cliche a bit, but it is also so true, that you can be yourself and that's okay. And I think I've only really just learned that in probably the last 3 or 4 years during the pandemic as well. I know I've kept talking about that, but it was such a huge thing that the world went through, and that we were all kind of connected by. That during that time, there was no other option than to just be me. And, every single people function during that time was suddenly brought to the forefront, because we were the ones who needed to care for people and support them through this really traumatic time, when we didn't know ourselves. I mean, I did not know myself, as no one did, what was going to happen the next day, and just being forced to be on Zoom to hundreds of people, not really knowing exactly what's going to happen in the world in the next, in the future, even tomorrow, was a really scary thing. And all I could do was be myself, and not, you couldn't have masks during that time. So I learned that it's actually okay to be unsure, and that you can only be as compassionate and heartfelt as you can be naturally without having all the answers. And that, with that bit without having all the answers, is probably the key thing there, is that leadership of the past was about having the answers. You had to pretend, or be that leader who could give people what it was that they needed. But during this time, we didn't have the answers. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson. And since that time, I have continued to be myself more in meetings, in giving presentations, in being goofy, messing things up. That it's okay. It's okay. And it is a great lesson to have learned, because it's a much more freeing way of being, without kind of putting constraints on yourself and overthinking, as you said earlier, and just overanalyzing. Just turning up, and obviously you need to put effort in, and but just turning up and being able to be yourself is where the biggest lesson that I learned.
How do you define leadership?
I define leadership as trying to find the potential in people, and then helping them in whichever way you can to grow that potential. That's how I define leadership. That could be actually letting them go and letting them, move on in their career. I really always encourage, we kept a really amazing team for so long at Gucci Group, and then Kering, and then Stella McCartney as well. But actually, when people do move on, I find that so beautiful often, and if they're able to share with you, which luckily I felt honored that people were able to share with me, I would never take it badly. In fact, I'd always take it as a compliment, especially if they're going somewhere incredible and they're really excited about it. I think that's a really important factor in the cycle of leadership, letting people go on to the next thing.
When did you know that you were a leader?
When I'm with my own team. I think when people are looking to you, for whatever reason it might be, actually, whether it's personal, professional, whatever, that's when I know that I'm a leader, and that's what actually makes the most difference to me. I don't think I definitely didn't feel like a leader when I was thrown into those rooms full of leaders, executives. I definitely didn't feel like a leader then. But yeah, it's when I'm with my own team, working on great projects, and pulling the best things out of the room and out of the conversation, and just that's when I feel most a leader.
I just want to say, one, I appreciate you just sharing some of your thoughts and that insight, but also what you're doing with Nature Consulting Limited, for me, it's so important. A lot of people know that, especially the work that I do, I'm very much around creating people over profit organizations and cultures. And you're someone who, like I have had the pleasure of getting to know the last couple of years, working together the last couple of years. But I know that you are so heart driven, and you can also, you're one of people who is not just about talking about it, you do it. Like the experience, the receipts, as I like to say, are there with 20 plus years of working in this space. But you're one of those people within this space where it's like, no, it's focused really on creating the right environment and the right conditions for people. Let's focus on looking after the organization, see sustainable change around equality, equity, inclusion, belonging. Those are things that are like you've been driving and pushing for years, even way before the systems came about, or way before it was cool. So it's just, for me, it's always a pleasure just to see people working in their purpose and looking at changing things that are currently not working to make things better for the future. And I just appreciate that.
Take that.
Good. Take it all in.
It's been great. been really good to share some of these things.
I'm glad to hear it. This is the end of today's episode of Everyday Leadership. If you want more information around Nature Consulting Limited, around Abigail, all that is going to be available in the show notes. Like I said, this is someone that a lot of organizations and leaders need to definitely get involved and work with going forward, because what she is doing is going to make a massive impact to your organization going forward. So make sure you check her out, and I will see you all next week.